With Elestrals' recent limits to Lavalith, Earthquake, and resting on your laurels, the metagame has been thrown into a state of uncertainty. Even after the first official webcam tournament post restrictions, there is no clear best deck, with the top 8 featuring Thunder decks, a Rhinosect Cryoscorch combo, Waylance, and Bears. With hard removal now harder to come by, let's take a look at a card that has cropped up in top decks to fill the holes left by the limits. But first, let me introduce myself. Skip to this timestamp if you don't care. I'm Xenon, and I love card games in all their forms. I've previously played Yu-Gi-Oh!, both pre-Xyz era and in 2024, Magic the Gathering, mostly in limited formats, Hearthstone, and a bit of the One Piece TCG, though I won't claim to have been particularly good at any of these games. I started my journey as an Elestrals caster a few weeks ago, after months of purely observing the game. A major part of what drew me to Elestrals is its open-ended resource system, as well as its plethora of critters with unique effects and potential synergies. Elestrals, more so than any card game I've played, has me pumped to experiment, and that's exactly what I intend to do in this series. I'll be cataloging my explorations of janky or relatively unsung deck archetypes and strategies, with the hope that even if the rough holds no diamonds, these ideas can serve as a basis for future iterations, or inspire any of you watching to experiment yourselves. Today we'll be focusing on Thunder, one of my 2 current favorite spirit types alongside Solar. While I missed out on the joys of Sparkit's repeatable hand rip, I want to explore Thunder's potential in the Daybreak metagame. The card that stands out to me the most is Race to the Top, which, with a bit of setup, offers very cheap Elestral destruction. In today's experiment, we'll be combining this card with some beefy beaters to tempo out opponents with efficient removal, aided by some stun tactics from a certain baby rhinoceros. Today's spirit experiment is Rice to the Top, aka Thunder Thighs. Here are the materials we'll be using in today's experiment. Let's go through them one by one. First up, we have one half of the deck's namesake, Race to the Top, which allows you to, for 1 Thunder, target 2 Elestrals and destroy the one with lower defense if Mount Olympus is enchanted. If their defenses are tied, you get to choose, which does come up. To enable this powerful piece of removal, we're obviously running 2 Jolton and 3 Mount Olympus. I landed on 2 Jolton because we want to get the most out of our normal casts each turn, and I was concerned about bricking, whereas drawing multiple Olympus can at least be helpful against rune removal. We then have 3 copies each of Astrabbit and our other title card, Raiceros, a 2/4 that prevents Elestrals from attacking on the turn they are cast unless they're Thunder enchanted. Raiceros helps us control the tempo against non-Thunder decks by turning off one of Elestral's strongest forms of removal, which is summoning a guy and attacking over things. Both the Rabbit and the Rhino also have big defense stats, which empowers Race to the Top. Next, we're running 2 copies of Boombat. Boombat's Elestral destruction is incredibly valuable post-ban list, and you could argue for running 3 in main, but I again wanted to avoid drawing multiples early on and not establishing enough board presence against setup decks. We're also running 3 Mudlet and 3 Lumaru, 2 strong cards in any beatdown-based strategy. If Mount Olympus is on board, a misenchanted Lumaru represents 6 power, as well as 3 defense for Race to the Top in a pinch. I chose Mudlet over something like Galaxair because it allows me to easily slot in the one of Earthquake, while still representing a decent defense stat for Race to the Top. Galaxair or an Eddy Tsunami package could be worth testing in future iterations. Finally, I'm trying out a single copy of Arcolith to help push for game, recover from early games that don't go our way, and give further fuel to cast runes if needed. For our Invoke runes, we have classic efficient removal tools, with the one of EQ, 1 Resting on Your Laurels, and 2 Cryoblast, as well as 2 Thunderstorm for some rune removal. How many Cryoblast and Race to the Top you main deck could vary depending on what you expect to face, but I chose to prioritize 3 Race to maximize the chance we get to test it out. For our counter runes, we have the usual: 2 Shield, 3 Gorgons, and 3 Poison-Tipped Arrow. The 3 PTAs are especially important to max out on to deal with Astrabbit, which could be a big early game sticking point for this deck in particular. For spirits, we're running a straightforward 4 Taratlus, 2 Flurmine, and 14 Zaptors. In the side deck, we've got 3 Specterus, 3 Dense Fog, 3 Owloon, the 3rd Shield, Cryoblast, Thunderstorm, and Boombat, 1 Quackle, and 1 Zeus, with those last 2 very much being flexible for whatever inclusions suit you. Now that we've gathered all our materials, let's see how our deck's theory fares in a field test. This game is up against Solar Nexus, and while I could have shown a different game where our tempo game plan kind of steamrolls the Celestlio deck, I think this game better shows off both what can go wrong with the deck, as well as how our key pieces can still make a big impact. I start off the clash by casting out Raiceros, playing Mount Olympus, and setting 1 back row. My opponent starts off with an Apollo and is going to immediately use that Apollo to foretell 3. He reveals a Lustragon, a Plucky, and a Shield, and ends up taking the Lustragon. He then casts out an Astrabbit, and we don't have a response. This isn't looking too good. You can't see it, but I drew a PTA for turn right afterwards, of course. I cast out a Thunderstorm to destroy his Apollo. And then I actually just go ahead and re-enchant Raiceros in the hopes of eventually beating over the Astrabbit, which is my best plan as of this moment, and set 1 more back row. My opponent plays out another Apollo, and they once again use the effect to foretell. This time they're going to take the Exaltus. Then they cast out a Datora, and then they go ahead and use its effect to Nexus to heal 2. After that, they pass back to me. On my turn, I swap my Raiceros to attack and re-enchant it again hoping to eventually beat over that Astrabbit. I attack in, but my opponent responds with an Altar to change it to defense and to Nexus back to the Apollo. I pass back, and my opponent goes for a Nog. They then ascend into Lustragon, and I respond with a Poison-Tipped Arrow. They use their Lustragon's effect to Nexus to destroy my Mount Olympus, but they can't attack over to clear my board because of my Raiceros' effect. I pay out the PTA at the end of the turn. Then on my turn, I re-enchant for a 3rd time and just pass it right back. My opponent disenchants off the Apollo again to foretell, and they take a Lumaru this time. They then cast out that Lumaru misenchanted. They set a back row and attempt to swing in, but I go ahead and shield that. On my turn, I cast out an Astrabbit of my own to dig through my deck, but then I'm forced to pass right back, having no response to their Astrabbit. They actually ascend over their Astrabbit with the Lumaru, which I then respond to with another PTA I drew. Would have been nice to have that on the first turn, but it is what it is. My opponent decides to pull 1 spirit off of the now doomed Lumaru to cast Ambrosia, healing 3 spirits. It's back to me, and I cast out a Jolton to search for Mount Olympus. I then play that Mount Olympus, and it's time to get the beats on. I switch everything to attack and set 1 back row. And when I swing in, 2 of the attacks go through, but my Raiceros gets shielded, unfortunately. My opponent then has another rabbit. Oh, come on. They go ahead and set another back row and pass it back. I re-enchanted my Astrabbit to keep digging again because I don't have an answer to this stupid bunny, but I'm forced to pass right back. And my opponent actually ascends over Astrabbit with Astrabbit just to get another search because they can't re-enchant with any more Zaptors. They don't find anything and pass back, and at this point I only have 2 Terratlus left in my deck, but I've drawn an Arcolith. I ascend my Astrabbit into Arcolith using a Terratlus, but its effect actually is still live because the Astrabbit was already double enchanted. My opponent unfortunately has a Gorgons for the Arcolith effect to re-enchant, but I'm able to pull the Zaptor off of the Jolton to cast my bluff set Race to the Top, targeting the Arcolith and the Astrabbit. Since their defenses are tied, I get to choose what gets destroyed. I told you it would come up, and I'm able to clear their field. My opponent draws for turn, but they have no answers to this Arcolith. They scoop it up, and we barely eke out a win with only 1 Terratlus left in deck. What a crazy way for this to end. With our experiment complete for now, let's discuss conclusions and avenues for further research. This deck seems very strong into slower, setup-reliant decks, and decks not running Thunder Elestrals. With the right hand, you can outpace them with efficient tempo and removal to accrue a board and spirit advantage before their game plan kicks off. I also believe this deck could be strong into non-Thunder focused Beatdown or 5s decks. I actually came up with this deck concept before the ban list dropped as a potential anti-meta brew. However, as you saw in our field test, the deck can unfortunately struggle against normal cast Astrabbit if you don't open the right hand, which isn't great considering the bunny is in basically every deck. For future testing, it's worth messing around with what pieces of removal to include and at what ratios, as I mentioned during the deck rundown. It could also be possible to construct a slower, control or heal-oriented build to leverage Race to the Top more consistently, throwing in cards like Quackle, Nectar of the Gods, and maybe even Catarants or Raiceros, given we're already running Fleur Mines for Cryoblast. I'll almost definitely be exploring Raiceros' potential in a future episode, so if you're a fellow Ricist, stay tuned. Finally, while I wrote this script prior to last Sunday's tournament, I'll note that I actually brought this deck to the tournament, and went an impressive, 1-3 drop. However, I'd attribute this to a lack of additional testing and practice with the deck rather than the deck itself, as I had originally planned to play something else before my mail got delayed. So I didn't put in the proper time to learn the deck's matchups and play patterns. Some takeaways from my tournament run are that the deck should definitely include Leviathans, as their presence likely would have won me a close 1-2 set against Water 5s. Also, Thunder decks are much more meta than I previously anticipated. Therefore, it might be worth running a more traditional 5s list with Eddies and Tsunamis, keeping Raiceros as a side deck option once you know your opponent isn't on Thunder. For now, I encourage you to try out the deck for yourself, make any other changes you think might improve it, and let me know your ideas in the comments, as well as any experiments you'd like to see in the future. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next experiment. Thank you very much for watching, and happy labbing!